This is Inside Out, a podcast about encountering the reality behind the religion. And this is episode 5. If you're new here, welcome. You don't need to have heard the first 4 to follow this one. But if you have been walking through this series, you already know that the first 4 episodes were diagnosis. We named the wheel, we named the lie that built it, we asked whether any of this is historically serious, and found out it is. And then we looked at the distorted image of God that both exhausted believers and honest skeptics have been reacting to, and found out that image isn't real. This episode turns the corner. We're now in movement 2. The diagnosis is behind us. What's ahead is reality. The actual things that are true underneath everything that's been layered on top. And the first reality, the one every other reality in this series depends on, is grace. Not grace as the thing you knew about when you started, grace as the floor. For most people who've spent any time inside of faith, there was a season when something felt genuinely alive. Maybe it was early. Maybe it was a specific moment you can still date. Maybe it was something more gradual, a slow opening, like a window you didn't know was closed. But there was a season when the thing felt new and real and unforced, when you weren't performing for anyone, when the wheel hadn't been invented yet, or you hadn't found it, or you were so aware of grace that the wheel had no traction. And then, somewhere, that changed. Not overnight, not with a decision. Nobody wakes up one morning and thinks, I'm going to trade encounter for obligation today. I'm going to go back to earning what I was given. It doesn't happen like that. It arrives dressed as growth. I should be more disciplined. I should be further along than this. I should be praying more, reading more, sinning less, showing up more consistently. The first recommitment feels like a return to something important. The second feels like course correction. By the 5th or 6th, it just feels like what this is supposed to look like. And the wheel is back, fully assembled, and nobody remembers deciding to get back on it. That drift is what this episode is about. Not to scold it, not to diagnose it one more time, but to name what it actually is, and to show you the way back. Because the way back is not behind you, it's beneath your feet, wherever you happen to be standing right now. There was a letter in the New Testament that was written for this exact moment, written for this exact drift, written for people who had started right and ended wrong. Not because they were bad people, not because they were insincere, but because they were human. And the pull back toward performance is one of the most powerful pulls there is. The letter is Galatians, and the man who wrote it, the Apostle Paul, was not measured when he found out what had happened to the church there. He was astonished. Listen to how he opens it. You foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you? Are you so foolish? You began your life in Christ by the Spirit. Now are you trying to make it complete by the flesh? Chapter 3, verses 1 and 3. The Greek word behind bewitched is literally the word for casting a spell, putting someone under an enchantment. Paul is not being rhetorical. He's asking, what other explanation is there? Paul uses a specific Greek verb here, proegraphe, the language of posting a public placard in a town square, an official notice where everyone could read it. So clear and so public that it was as if they had watched the crucifixion themselves. And they still walked back into the cage. That's what astonished Paul. Not that they had failed, not that they had sinned, that they had received something that no one can earn, unambiguously, vividly, with their own eyes, and then slowly, plausibly, in ways that probably felt like maturity, they had started trying to finish it themselves. The Galatians weren't abandoning grace. That's what makes this so subtle and so dangerous. They weren't walking away from Jesus. They were supplementing him. Grace had opened the door. Now performance would finish the job. Grace was the beginning. Discipline and religious seriousness and the accumulation of the right credentials would produce the mature, complete version. This is what led to Paul's devastating question in verse 3, which is essentially, did you actually think grace was the draft and effort was the final product? Grace is not the on-ramp to a highway of effort. Grace is the entire road. I want to stay with the drift mechanism for a minute, because understanding how it works is the only way to see it when it's happening. Nobody announces the drift. Nobody stands up and says, I'm going back to the performance framework now. I've decided that earning my standing sounds better than receiving it. The drift never introduces itself that way. If it did, almost nobody would choose it. Here's how it actually arrives. It arrives as a desire to be serious, as a recognition that something matters. I care about this enough to be disciplined about it. And that's not wrong. The caring is real. The desire to grow is real. The willingness to be serious is real. None of those things are the problem. The problem is the architecture underneath them. The problem is when seriousness quietly becomes the mechanism, when the doing starts to feel like the engine of the transformation, rather than cooperation with the one who does the transforming. When what began as, I want to meet him here, slowly becomes, I need to show up here, or I'm falling behind. The love that first opened you gets quietly replaced by the pressure to deserve it. And the insidious part is that the drift often feels, from the inside, like growth, like finally taking this seriously, like the honeymoon phase is over and now you're doing the real work. There's even a kind of pride available in it. The pride of discipline, of consistency, of being the kind of person who doesn't let their standards slip. But the fruit of the drift, if you're honest about it, is exhaustion, distance, a growing sense that God is slightly disappointed, slightly waiting for you to catch up, slightly more present when you've had a good week than when you haven't. Prayer starts to feel like a performance review. The wheel is back, you didn't build it, but you're on it. Paul wrote Galatians for this, not for people who walked away, for people who stayed and drifted back without leaving. The Greek word behind grace means unrepayable favor, a gift that carries no obligation to the giver. The receiver owes nothing to the one who gives it. That is the entire economy of what grace is. You don't owe the one who gives grace, you receive it. That's not a soft thing. That's not a sentimental thing. That's a structural thing. It describes the nature of the transaction. There is no transaction. There is only gift. And the only posture the gift asks is open hands. Listen to how Paul says it in Ephesians. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not as a result of works, so that no one may boast. Chapter 2, verses 8 and 9. Not of yourselves, not as a result of works. the gift of God. 3 different ways of saying the same thing. That the origin of this is not you, the mechanism of this is not performance, and the result cannot be something you claim credit for. Paul says it a 3rd time in Romans 5. But God demonstrates his own love toward us, in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Verse 8. While we were yet sinners, not when we had improved enough, not when we had shown sufficient commitment, not when we had demonstrated that we were serious about changing. While we were exactly the problem. Before any of that, the thing was already done. That is the ground. And here's what the ground means practically. It doesn't shift under the weight of your failure. It doesn't strengthen under the accumulation of your performance. It is exactly what it was the day you first received it. A week of consistent prayer does not move you closer to it. A week of failure does not move you further from it. It is under you, constant, unaffected, not a reward and not a ledger. Grace is the ground. There is nowhere else to stand. I want to talk about the way back, because I think we sometimes imagine it as more complicated than it is. We imagine we have to earn re-entry, that having drifted, having lived from performance for months or years, there's a process for returning to grace. A sufficient amount of confession, or recommitment, or demonstrated sincerity, before we can stand on it again. There isn't. The way back is the same as the way in. Paul ends the arc in Galatians 5:1. It was for freedom that Christ set us free. Therefore keep standing firm, and do not be subject again to a yoke of slavery. For freedom, not for a slightly improved version of the cage, not for a softer yoke. For freedom, as the destination, not as the means to something else. Jesus told a story that is the picture of this. A son who had taken everything, wasted it, found himself in the kind of poverty that makes you eat what the pigs eat, and then, the text says, he came to himself. He came back to reality, and he turned around and walked toward home. He had a speech prepared. He'd rehearsed the terms of his return. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. He had worked out the transaction. He was going to earn his way back to at least a working relationship. But the father saw him from a long way off. The father had apparently been looking and ran. Before the son reached the gate, before the speech was finished, the father ran and fell on his neck. And the rehearsed apology was still coming out of the son's mouth when the robe was already on his shoulders, and the ring was on his finger, and the feast was being called for. The return was not a promotion back to standing. It was a homecoming to the ground that was never taken away. That is the way back. You turn around and walk toward it. Not because you've earned the right to return, not because you've demonstrated sufficient remorse, simply because you're facing the right direction. And the Father has been watching from further back than you can see. I want to address something directly, because I know this question is already forming in some of you. If grace is the ground, if the transformation is the Spirit's work, not mine, then what are all those commands about? Paul says, take every thought captive. Jesus says, deny yourself and take up your cross daily. Hebrews says, pursue the sanctification without which no one will see the Lord. Those are not soft texts. They're not metaphors for sitting still and receiving. This is a real question, and it deserves a real answer, not a soft one. The answer is not that the commands aren't real commands. They are. The grammar is genuinely imperative. The effort is genuinely required. Anyone who tells you the commands are just descriptions of what naturally happens when you abide enough is not being honest with the text. But here's what the commands are actually commanding. And this is the thing the Pharisee architecture always gets wrong. The commands are not asking you to produce the transformation. They're asking you to cooperate with where the transformation comes from. Think about it in 3 layers. The first layer is what only the Spirit can do, the root level change. What you actually believe at depth about God, yourself, others. That is not available to willpower. You cannot discipline yourself into a different belief. You cannot out-effort a lie that's been living at the root of your operating system for 20 years. Root-level belief can only be changed by encounter, by experiences that carry enough emotional weight to displace what was there before. That is the Spirit's work, and no human effort can substitute for it. The second layer is what the will actually can do. Direct attention, expose unexamined belief, refuse to let lies operate unchallenged in the dark. Bring the thought to the one who is truth and let it stand in the light. Take every thought captive. The image is military, leading a prisoner into the light. Doesn't mean force yourself to feel different. It means refuse to let this thought operate unexamined. The will can do that. The third layer is where the commands live as occasion. Obedience while not yet believing, which positions you in places where the Spirit can create the experiences that update the root. Peter put his net out into the deep before he believed the deep would yield anything. The obedience came first, the catch came second, the catch produced an experience, the experience updated the belief. 3 years later, that updated belief produced an unprompted leap toward Jesus across open water. The discipline didn't transform Peter, but the discipline positioned Peter where the transformation could happen. So the commands are real, the effort is real, but the effort is cooperation, not engine. Grace is the ground, the commands are the cooperation. And the Pharisee error, the one Jesus reserved his sharpest words for, is taking the third layer and inflating it into the first, believing that disciplined action is the transformation, cleaning the outside of the cup and expecting the inside to follow. It doesn't. The Spirit does the root level change. The will cooperates, and the ground underneath all of it is grace. Unearned, unshifting, never contingent on your performance. Before we close, I want to practice what this chapter teaches. Because just talking about grace, even talking about it well, is still information. And we've spent 4 episodes learning that information is not transformation. What moves the root is not a better explanation of grace. It's an encounter with the one who is the ground of it. This is the 4-step encounter practice. The same practice we use in every episode. If you've been with us since episode 1, it's familiar. If this is your first time, it's simple. 4 steps, 15 minutes. Let's start by pausing and taking a breath. Step 1, believe. Before you ask for anything, before you bring a problem or a confession or a report on your week, simply hold this. Jesus is present right now. His posture toward you is not contingent on how your week has gone, not on how consistent you've been, not on how much you've improved since the last time you did this, not on whether you've earned the right to come close. He is simply here. Step 2, ask. With that presence held, simply ask, Jesus, where are you? Then wait. Step 3, look. With the eyes of your heart, look for him, in the direction of where you sense his presence. Don't force anything, and don't explain away what comes. Step 4, fix your gaze. Stay there. Don't move toward analysis yet. Don't evaluate what you're receiving or whether it's significant enough. Remain. Notice what he does. Notice how it feels to be in his presence. When you're ready, come back. And if you're able, write down what you received, whatever it was, whatever form it took. Don't grade it. Don't compare it to someone else's experience. Just capture it. This is what it means to begin with grace. If what we've talked about today opens something for you, the companion to this episode is Chapter 5 of the Inside Out Study Guide, The Reality of Grace. There are reflection questions there, the practice written out, and a deeper look at the Greek terms we walked through today. The anchor article for this episode is called Grace and the Commands, which is also at tedtalking.life. It takes the cooperative architecture we touched on near the end of this episode, what the Spirit does, what the will can do, and how those two things work together without collapsing into each other, and lays it out in full. And next time, we go one layer deeper, into the reality that undergirds grace itself. We've established that grace is the floor. Next week we ask, what is the floor actually made of? I'll see you there.